What's up YouTube, this is Galactic God and welcome to another Yu-Gi-Oh! Q A. Now let me dive right into this. The first question comes from David Ash I. Rob, something like that maybe. He asks, is Yu-Gi-Oh! Your biggest hobby? If not, then what is? Really Yu-Gi-Oh! Is my biggest hobby now. Originally my biggest hobby was collecting comic books. I did that from when I was in grade school, really all the way up until right past high school. I was a huge collector of comic books. I loved the Spectacular Spider-Man, Amazing Spider-Man, Batman, Guardians of the Galaxy. I used to collect a huge variety of both Marvel and DC books, and I had a massive collection. And then what ended up happening was I started playing Yu-Gi-Oh! And I started to get into that. I was collecting comic books and playing Yu-Gi-Oh! And Yu-Gi-Oh! Was not as big of a collection as it is today, of course. It was just kind of, I had my main deck that I had played and maybe a few extra little cards that I had for trading or just whatever I had off to the side that I wasn't using. You gotta remember back when I first started playing Yu-Gi-Oh! That there wasn't a bunch of different kinds of decks. There was really just one deck that you would have, and it would have just a massive collection of random cards. There weren't no really themed decks. They had stuff like Gravekeepers and Amazonas and stuff like that out when I first originally started playing, but those decks were really subpar to just building your own deck. They weren't as good as just getting a mismatch of all the really good cards. And so having a big, huge collection wasn't really necessary because you wouldn't play some of these other decks. Anyways, what ended up happening is I had lost my whole comic collection really in storage. I ended up losing a storage unit after I'd moved, and I had lost all those books, and then after that I just kind of gave up on collecting comic books. I didn't have the heart to get back into it because I had lost so many books, everything from my childhood up until that point. But I still had my Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards because I took them with me and I didn't put them in storage because I was still playing them and stuff. That drive to collect comic books kind of spilled over into Yu-Gi-Oh! And that's when I actually started really collecting the cards. That's when I started getting 3 of just about every holographic card there was. And that's kind of where the idea of my collection came from, was just I needed a new kind of hobby to collect, and comics was out, and so I already had kind of a little bit of collection of Yu-Gi-Oh! And I really enjoyed playing it, and just kind of spawned from that. The next question comes from Stardust Swag 1990. He asks, what TCG structure deck do you think is the most competitive and why? Now, a lot of people might say right off the bat Chaos Dragon, because Chaos Dragon leads into probably one of the best decks of this last format. But I think overall, if you buy just the structure deck, if you buy just 3 copies of any structure deck, I don't think you'll get that great of a Chaos Dragon deck. I mean, you'll have a somewhat good deck, but I think if you really want to have a real good, consistent, strong deck and be competitive with just the cards in the structure deck, I think the Dark World structure deck is the way to go. I think you get just about pretty much any kind of card that you would need for the Dark World deck in the Dark World structure deck. The only card you're really missing would be Drag Down to the Grave, and the deck can function quite well even without that card. It's not like an essential staple like BLS or Effect Veiler or Tour Guide or something like that is to Chaos Dragons, which you won't get out of the structure deck. Plus, the Chaos Dragon structure deck doesn't give you the Syncros or the Exceeds or Future Fusion or Five-Headed Dragon or anything like that you would definitely need to play a Chaos Dragon deck real effectively. So for my money, Dark Worlds is the way to go. If you buy 3 copies of the structure deck for Dark Worlds, I think you'll get a pretty consistent, strong Dark World deck out of it. The next question comes from Sega S, and he asks, how do you feel about the rumor that Dark Magician of Chaos is coming back? I actually love Dark Magician of Chaos. I think DMOC is a great card. Unfortunately, he's abused a lot in certain OTK kind of decks. And when DMOC was first, released, there was not a huge amount of ways to get him back from being removed from play. Now there's a lot of cards that allow you to utilize the remove from play aspect of the game. And when he was originally released, once he was removed from play, there was really no getting him back. He was just really done. That was it. You got his effect off, and that was all you're going to get. But now with so many options of grabbing cards that have been removed from play and bringing them back into play, or putting them back in the graveyard, or putting them back in your deck, DMOC becomes just that much more of a stronger card, I think. And I personally would love to see him back. I think he's a great card. I know they really want to push spellcasters with this new set, and if he comes back, I'm all for it. I'd love to see him come back for a format or two and see how he works. Is he really that busted as we remember him, or is bringing him back really not going to hurt the meta that much? You never really know until stuff comes back. I mean, people thought that Dark Hole would destroy the game by bringing it back, and it's been around for a long time, and a lot of people would say it's kind of essential for it. And you just never know until a card comes back if it's still as busted as you remember it, or if it's kind of playable now or usable. Mr. Yugi Fan 01 asks, what do you think about Legendary Collection 3 Yugi's World? At first, when I first heard about this, I was really disappointed in it. I was really hoping that we were going to get a 5Ds kind of Legendary Collection 3. But the more I kind of read about the cards that were going to be released in Legendary Collection 3, the more I kind of started to get behind it. I love reprints of cards that were not available as holographic and then are now available. I like getting holographic versions of all the recruiters, such as, Mother Grizzly and Flying Kamakari and all those cards that really were only rare before and never came in holographic form. I think it's kind of cool to be able to get them. Plus, we're going to get an easy to get holographic Book of Moon with the secret rare version of it. And I think it's kind of cool. Toxic Game Fan asks, what is your first ever deck? A lot of people might know this. I kind of talked about it before. The first deck that I ever played was a water deck. I kind of had that deck for quite a few months before I kind of changed it around and kind of build my own. This is a long time ago. It was a Legendary Devotion kind of water deck, and it had a crap load of normal water monsters in it, Amphibious Beast, and 7 Colored Fish, or whatever the heck that thing was called, and just a bunch of those old school normal water monsters that no one in their right mind would ever play now. There was kind of like what made up my water deck. And it was kind of cool. It was what kind of got me into the game, and it kind of had a theme to it, which back in the day most decks never had a theme, so it was kind of cool to play around with that. It had cards that worked with just the water cards. And I always look back with that deck with kind of a fondness because it's what got me into the game. And when I was thinking about trying to get my son to play the game, to teach him how, I was like, man, maybe I should rebuild that water deck and see if he can kind of get into it like that. Sporks14 asks, in your deck profiles, you always seem to run the usual Syncros and Exceeds and such. So my question is, do you take the staples out of old decks for the newer ones, or do you have a lot of the Syncros, such as Brionac and Catastra and the other staples? The answer to that is quite simple. I actually have 3 of every one of the Syncros and 3 of every one of the Exceeds. Whether they're staples or not. I usually collect 3 of every card, and so that's pretty much what I have. So I could have anywhere from 3 or more kind of extra decks put together with all the main staples in them, depending on what the actual extra deck consists of. I could have maybe probably about 4 or 5 different complete extra decks for the different decks that I have, depending on, of course, what they really need in them. Obviously, some decks don't require Synchro, some decks don't require Exceeds, and so I have quite a bit of them based off of that. I do have some cards I have more than 3 of. I think I have like 5 or 6 different Stardusts that I have floating around, and I have maybe a few extra Brios and stuff like that, Catasters, just because they go into quite a bit of decks. But I do kind of flip-flop them around. I don't usually play more than 5 or 6 complete decks anyways at any one time, and then I kind of take them apart and put them off on the shelf or something. I have, Gadget decks and Glad Beast decks and all these other kind of decks that I have, just in my collection that I'm not utilizing right at the moment. But if I was ever wanting to get back and play into the Glad Beast deck again, I could just, dust off all the Glad Beast stuff and bring it out and make that deck. Official Playmat asks, what do you think of Windups winning Nationals? I'm actually pretty excited about it. I think Windups are a good deck, and hopefully by them winning Nationals, they're going to hit Hunter on the ban list and get rid of that card and make Windups just a little bit better, because they're at least a little bit more creative, or a little bit more playable, or a little bit more fun to play against, or a little bit more of an option than just going for that crazy windup loop, which everyone kind of has to do if you're going to play windups. If you want to be competitive and play windups right now, you have to include the loop because it's so strong. If you don't, people are going to look at you crazy like, why are you playing windups without the loop? I personally don't care for the loop. Whenever I play my windup deck on DN, I don't include Hunter because I'm sure nobody wants to play against the loop. And I think that there's so much more to the deck than just that loop, and by hopefully them getting rid of Hunter, players will try and think outside the box and make new, more creative decks with windups. And I think by windups winning Nationals, we have a good chance of Hunter ending up on the list. Ruku-san asks, what do you think is the biggest problem with the Yu-Gi-Oh community? I think the biggest problem is that people tend to be real negative in this game. There's so much positive about playing Yu-Gi-Oh, about being creative with the decks, and I think so often have I gone to tournaments where people have called other players scrubs or noobs, or just made even kids, young kids, feel so bad about playing the game, to deal with so much BS once you go to these bigger events, and even to locals, you can see like people who think that they're just the shit, and then they friggin' make other people feel like crap, or maybe they lost and they want to make themselves feel better, and they make the other person like, oh, you luck sack that, and that's the only reason why you won. You just top deck that. You're a horrible player. You wouldn't have won if you didn't top deck that card, or something like that. And it's just, I think that that's just not necessary. I think that the community as a whole needs to just kind of, I don't know, I guess get a little more mature in that aspect and just realize that this game is for fun, and that if you're not having fun, then maybe you shouldn't be playing this game. Okay, so that's it for this Q&A episode. If you have a question you'd like me to answer in the next Q&A segment, please leave it below in the comment section and I'll try and get to it. Also, if you'd like to leave me a video response question, you can do so. I will play that video response first before I answer the question in the next episode as well. And I guess that's it for now. This is GalacticGod, out.